So for me, when dyslexia is referred to being your superpower, I think, yes, that's great if that's how a child sees themselves. But sometimes I really struggle with seeing celebrities that are now very comfortable with their dyslexia and have really embraced their dyslexia. But sometimes it can come across a little bit disingenuous, and it can also alienate those children that are feeling not very confident about their dyslexia at that point in time.
From my son's experience, he found being dyslexic difficult because it was different and he was different to everyone else. I think as he's getting older, he's realising that actually it does make him different. I can certainly see he has so much empathy, and I truly believe that is connected to who he is, and part of that is dyslexia. He thinks in a very different way. He is extremely creative, is very happy to play on his own or with other people. I think it really benefits him in sport. So he's very, very sporty, can play any type of sport. The only challenge I would say with that, he has to, well, he always informs his coach that he's dyslexic. So maybe if they tell him, giving him instruction, they might need to repeat it a couple of times. He's very confident with that. But once it's in, that's it, it's never going. So that for me is a direct correlation to being dyslexic, how he absorbs information and who he is as a person.
I noticed really strong executive functioning skills. You know, I'll let Imani tell her, but her friends call her the PA because she knows their schedule, you know, where they're supposed to be, how things are due. She's a little nosy too, but that's another story. You know, I think it's just that almost ability to hyper-focus at times as well, to really just, you know, put your nose in it and not be distracted, despite maybe, like I say, having a less of a working memory. It's that, you know, it's that sort of that work ethic that I noticed that dyslexic students have, and maybe that's what it is. It just, you know, are very, very, you know, obviously I don't want to say everybody, but generally I find dyslexic students to be can be very focused, can be very hardworking, can be very organized, to the point of almost being somewhat of a perfectionist, which in certain ways, I think in this context of writing essays or, you know, making sure you get every little detail right is, you know, time consuming, but very helpful.
There's certain traits with Lily that, I mean, I've got 4 children that I don't get with the other 3. She can out-argue me, right? I'm never wrong. Oh my God, she's never wrong. And I am wrong. And she can really analyse and put things down. I'm thinking, do you know what, you're right. And I just don't see that in the other children.
I have children in therapy that would cast out reading or writing, but putting into a play activity where we're creating a story and we're making an environment that we have to do a course from one side of the room and the other, not touching the floor, and we have to plan that by writing. Suddenly they're writing on the board that they'd never think of doing. The creative side, I mean, our art department, what they produce is out of this world. Like, if you saw that put anywhere else, you wouldn't think that a student had completed it. So I think there's so many areas, and you just look at celebrities, the amount of celebrities that have dyslexia that you wouldn't even know did, because they have been able to put strategies in place and focus on what it is that's their superpower.
I was an academic failure at school, or that's how it felt. And yet I now have a PhD because of my dyslexia. If I didn't have dyslexia, I'd probably have been better at school but wouldn't have got the PhD, if that makes sense. The way that I think about things, the way that I analyse things, not only deeply, but bringing different ideas together, that's what got me that doctorate.
Everybody's got strengths, regardless of whether we're dyslexic or not. It's about, when we're dyslexic sometimes, I think those strengths get lost because of the educational system. So for me, my real strength is I'm very good at talking, but I never really valued that as a strength until I got my diagnosis. I've got really good emotional literacy skill, I'm really good at reading people, reading the subtext of situations, building relationships with people. And I'm also really driven because I want to do well, and I've got a real thirst to keep learning and keep driving and moving myself forward. And I didn't really view that as a strength until recently. And I think with my children, I've actively looked for things that they're naturally good at. And one of the questions I get asked lots by other parents is, how do I identify dyslexic strengths? Well, it's basically anything that you or your child are good at, and, exploit that. Find ways that you can develop it and improve it.
I think dyslexia and young people with dyslexia should view it in a very positive way. It gives them an ability to see the world in a different way. It allows them to bring different things or ideas together, which other people might not see. Certainly for me, it helped me identify an opportunity in the sports industry and in stadiums. So we bring together live sport and dance music, obviously two very different worlds culturally. We work in horse racing, darts, cricket, rugby, polo, and rowing, Henley, and football now. We've just started doing that. Obviously the worlds of sort of drum and bass, house, tech, disco music is very different to those traditional sports. So I think dyslexia allowed me to see an opportunity to bring those two worlds together and effectively create a new product which isn't on the market anywhere else.
So I think the idea of dyslexic strengths are interesting because the way that you diagnose dyslexia is based on a deficit model. So you're not technically looking out for somebody's strengths if you're defining somebody as dyslexic. But I definitely think there are a lot of strengths that are included as well. And so I think that my dyslexic strengths would be lateral thinking skills. I tend to think in pictures, but I also think of things as kind of holistic ecosystems. And so in entrepreneurship, which is what I do for a living, I find that my lateral thinking skills can be quite useful, whether it be thinking about, okay, I've seen a particular use case of an idea somewhere in a different industry. I can take that and I can put that into the product that I'm building. Or even from a networking perspective, you meet somebody at a networking event or a party or a dinner and immediately can kind of categorize that in the Rolodex of my head to be like 100 ideas a second about how we could potentially work together or how this person could potentially work with somebody else that I know. I don't think that these are actually separate strengths. I think it's all part of the same strength. It's all pattern recognition, it's all lateral thinking. And so when you're kind of in a sales situation, thinking, what are all of the things that my potential client might be looking for? How can I potentially solve some of these problems? And thinking really creatively about this particular person. I think that's the same thing as innovating on a product or finding a use case for two people to work together. So I would say that my strengths is based around creativity and lateral thinking, and that's just manifest against like kind of many different use cases.
I've always found it really hard to quantify the kind of advantages dyslexia has given me. Like, just to be clear, if I had a choice, would I want to be dyslexic? Probably not. It's probably an easier way to get through life than not being dyslexic. That said, I think that it's really important to recognise that all dyslexics are different as well. It's like you wouldn't get somebody that was kind of, didn't have dyslexia or was neurotypical and go, how do neurotypical people think? And what are the advantages of being neurotypical? Do you know what I mean? So I think there's a danger of doing that human thing of like just placing all dyslexics into one pot and saying, this is the advantage of dyslexia, which I know that people like to do. I'm not sure necessarily that that's a great way of doing it. So I can only talk on behalf of me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And on behalf of me and where my advantages are, it is the ability to very quickly see the picture of something and what's happening and what we're trying to achieve from a project or an outcome, both in terms of like something new and innovative, but also in terms of something like problem solving. I tend to be the friend, for example, that if anybody has a crisis, it's like, go to Ed, because he'll kind of like map out exactly what the problem is and then think through the solutions and etc. And I put that down to my dyslexia.
I can make connections, and this seems to be quite a common feature with dyslexics, can make connections between certain objects and certain things and visualize things in different ways. And that within my work, I've worked in finance and also consulting. With that, there's a lot of presentations, and one of the things that I absolutely hate about presentations is when they're just full of words, bullet points, and that is the all that's being presented. It's far better for anyone when they're looking at a presentation to see that visually. And that's something that I'm very able to do with, and I think dyslexia has helped me to get towards that and helped me to create far better presentations.
The thing that stopped me from feeling ashamed about my dyslexia after I'd found out was somebody suggested I buy Ronald Davis's The Gift of Dyslexia, and I read that, and it made me feel better about myself. It also made me realize that a lot of the things that they talked about in that book were true of me. I am, I think, a highly creative person. I do see the bigger picture. I do draw different things together.
So I'm really conflicted when I'm asked about dyslexia being your superpower or it being an advantage, because I really do see lots of different perspectives on this situation. I see some children in my school that are absolutely flying. They have figured out their dyslexia, they've put the strategies in place, they're getting amazing results in their exams, which is just fantastic. But I also see children in my school really, really struggling with their dyslexia. So I might have a pupil, so in my class, I teach science still. I have the most amazing kids who are very articulate and can have fantastic conversations with me about the scientific topics. But when I look at their sort of assessed reading ages, they're 15, but they've got a reading age of 5 and 6. So for those children, if I had to ask them, do you think your dyslexia is an advantage? They would absolutely disagree. They would say it is not an advantage to them. It's something that they struggle with and something that they find really difficult. I've even had children, as a science teacher, saying, oh, is there a pill that I can take to get rid of my dyslexia? Which is just heartbreaking to hear a child speaking about themselves like that and thinking that that's part of them, but they want to get rid of it or they're not comfortable with it.